My inspirations are people like Mohandas Gandhi, Sylvia Pankhurst, Martin Luther King, and to some extent Malcolm X and Rosa Luxemburg. These were iconic figures who championed social justice and did so in ways that often directly challenged people in power. Now, I'm all in favor of sitting down and having a chat with people in power to try and negotiate a settlement. If there's an injustice, I'd much rather sit with them over a cup of tea and biscuits and work out a solution. But sometimes people in power do not listen. Sometimes people in power close their hearts and their minds. And so you're left with a choice, either just to accept things as they are or to try and be more challenging. And that is, of course, the history of the Chartists, the suffragettes, the campaign against the poll tax, the black civil rights movement in the United States, the Indian independence struggle in India. I don't claim to have all the answers, but over the many, many years of my activism, I have helped with others to change a few things. And just to go back to these two incidents, the first one you saw was the attempted citizen's arrest of President Mugabe of Zimbabwe in Brussels in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel in 2001. I'd been asked by human rights campaigners in Zimbabwe to do something to highlight the human rights abuses. So initially, I tried to have a lobby, or I did have a lobby outside the Zimbabwe High Commission in London, and did various other protests, but none of them had an impact. None of them worked. None of them changed anything. So I then hit on the idea of using the power of citizen's arrest. Under British law, any private citizen has the right to arrest another person if they have good grounds for believing that they have committed a crime or about to commit a crime. So I thought, well, I had the evidence that President Mugabe had condoned the use of torture. So this was clearly against both the United Nations Convention Against Torture 1984 and against Britain's own anti-torture law, which is enshrined in Section 134 of the Criminal Justice Act 1988. So the legal basis for a citizen's arrest was there. Of course, I did actually try a similar arrest in London in 1999 when we ambushed his motorcade and actually had President Mugabe under arrest. But this incident you saw took place in Brussels. But the Belgian government has, like the British government, also signed the United Nations Convention Against Torture. So under Belgian law, President Mugabe should have been arrested and put on trial, because Belgian law states clearly that anybody, any state official, anywhere in the world who commits, condones or authorizes an act of torture can be put on trial in Belgium. So I had tried the day before, or 2 days before, to persuade the Belgian authorities to arrest Mugabe. It was clear they were not going to, even though I presented the documentary evidence. So that's why I did the attempted citizen's arrest. I ended up, as you probably saw, being momentarily beaten unconscious, which has left me with some brain damage, but nothing major. The upshot was, although I did not succeed in arresting President Mugabe, the images of that attempt went all over the world and highlighted the fact that his people are prepared to use quite extreme measures. Now, what happened to me is nothing by comparison to what's been happening to people inside Zimbabwe. Arrested and detained without trial, tortured, raped, murdered. But a lot of people who saw that footage concluded, if President Mugabe is prepared to have his bodyguards beat up a peaceful protester in a European capital city in broad daylight in front of the world's media, just imagine what he's doing when no one's watching. So it was very effective in helping to highlight the tyranny and brutality of the Mugabe regime. It also had a very positive psychological and emotional effect for people inside Zimbabwe. They saw what I did and the massive global media coverage it generated. And in the weeks and months afterwards, I received thousands and thousands of messages from people inside Zimbabwe. And they nearly all said the same thing. We thought no one knew. We thought no one cared. You've helped shine a light on what the media has previously not been reporting. So emotionally, that was really important for people in Zimbabwe who were suffering and felt very ignored and neglected. Going to the second film, the second video about the arrest when I tried to protest against the Indonesian president in London in 2013. He was here on a state visit, and at the request of West Papuan activists, I and others decided to protest against him when he was addressing a big conference in Kensington or Knightsbridge. And so we lay in wait outside his hotel, but he managed to evade us. The next opportunity was when he was going to see the Queen and had been at an event at Westminster Abbey. So I decided to lay in wait, and as he left the Abbey in his motorcade, my plan was to simply stand at the side of the road, maybe in front of the car, I was debating that, with the West Papuan flag, to signal that people in Britain cared about what was happening to the people of West Papua, which, as I said, is the western half of New Guinea, which was annexed and occupied by Indonesia in the 1960s. So the people there do not want to be part of Indonesia. They're ethnically, culturally, politically, and religiously completely different from the rest of Indonesia. They are Melanesians, predominantly Christian or animist. Their culture is Melanesian, not Asian. Anyway, so as you saw in that footage, I walked to the edge of the road to hold up the flag and was grabbed and arrested and wrestled to the ground. And then, as you probably heard me complaining, the police, what they knew nowadays is they put you in handcuffs and then they twist them so they cut into your nerves. And it feels like a knife is sawing into your bone. It's agony. And that was completely unnecessary because I wasn't resisting arrest or anything, but that's just the vindictive way in which some police officers behave. Again, I didn't succeed in doing much except that what happened there, again, was on the news all around the world. And for the people in West Papua to know that someone had challenged the Indonesian president about the crimes against humanity that were happening there, that was really, really important. So that's just a flavor of some of the, or two examples of the human rights activism I've been doing all this last half a century. In fact, I've done probably about over 3,000 direct action protests. I've been arrested well over 100 times, but I only have one standing conviction, and that was for the Canterbury Cathedral protest in 1998. The then Archbishop of Canterbury was Dr. George Carey. When he became the Archbishop, he made it very clear that homosexuality was a terrible sin and that gay people must repent. But even worse, he was saying that gay people are inferior to heterosexual people and therefore do not deserve equal human rights. So he was lobbying members of Parliament to support discrimination in law and to oppose any gay law reform. Back in those days, in the 1990s, there were about 12 major laws that treated LGBT people as second-class citizens. And there was a move by myself and others to get Parliament to change those laws, to end that discrimination, to ensure equal rights. But the Archbishop was resistant, and he was going around lobbying members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords to stop them voting in favour of equality. We tried to meet him many times, but he wouldn't even deign to meet us. So we decided, well, if he won't meet us, we'll go and meet him. And where better to meet him than on the most important day in his calendar, when the event is televised worldwide. Let's challenge him on Easter Sunday in his cathedral as he delivers his sermon. So we travelled down to London in a fleet of cars, or two cars, and got there really early to make sure we got seats in the cathedral, because that's being a big civic occasion, it gets booked out very quickly. We sat in the side aisles near the front, so we weren't too conspicuous. We were all very dressed in our Sunday best, carried Bibles to make it, and started reading our Bibles while we were waiting. And then we didn't interrupt any of the sacred parts of the service. We didn't interrupt prayers or anything like that. We waited until Archbishop Carey began his sermon. And then we calmly got up out of our seats and began walking towards the pulpit. Then we noticed that there were 3 church wardens standing by the pulpit. And obviously we did not want a confrontation with them. We are non-violent in the tradition of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So one of our members had the very quick-footed thought of feigning an asthma attack. So he began wheezing and breathing and clutching his chest. And the wardens rushed over to help him. And while they were distracted, we calmly walked up into the pulpit, and I remember standing next to the Archbishop. He looked to his right and noticed me there, then stepped aside and gave me the pulpit, and then I gave a short impromptu alternative sermon, which went roughly on the lines that discrimination is not a Christian value, that the Archbishop is supporting discrimination against gay people. That's not part of what the Christian gospel is about. Being a big civic occasion, on this day, in the front row were the mayor, the leading councillors, the local dignitaries, including the local chief constable and some of his officers. So all they had to do is jump out of their seats and walk around to the pulpit. Now, I saw them getting out of their seats, but I was just concentrating on delivering my sermon. So I was holding on to the front of the pulpit, this beautiful, I think, 12th century pulpit. The next thing I know is these arms come around my waist and I'm yanked from behind. And of course I was holding on to the pulpit, so the pulpit comes apart in my hands. But I was then arrested and taken to Canterbury Police Station, where I was held in the cells for about 6 hours while the police debated what to charge me with. So they were thinking of charging me with criminal damage to the pulpit, but the video or the film would show very clearly I hadn't deliberately pulled it. I'd been yanked by the officers. So they couldn't come up with any charges, so I was bailed to return to the police some weeks later. And then they announced that I was going to be charged with, quote, indecent behaviour in a church contrary to the Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act of 1860, formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1551. And under that legislation, any interruption of a minister of religion in a place of worship is deemed to be indecent and a criminal offence. So I didn't drop my trousers or anything like that. I just did my speech, but that was deemed to be indecent. So when it came to my trial, the magistrate accepted that I had behaved, politely and courteously. I hadn't attacked the Archbishop or disparaged or abused the Christian religion. He said it was brief, it was peaceful, but he said under the law there are no exemptions. Under this law, if you interrupt a minister of religion in a place of worship, no matter how briefly or how peacefully, you are committing a crime. So I was found guilty. Now, I could have been fined £5,000 and sent to prison for 6 months. But instead, the magistrate pronounced a fine of £18.60, his jocular reference to the 1860 Act under which I'd been convicted. Now again, at one level, I didn't succeed other than raise awareness about the Archbishop's refusal to meet us and his agitation to maintain anti-gay laws. So that was effective. But the other upshot was, a bit down the line, is that he was quite embarrassed by the fact that we'd said for 8 years he had refused to meet us or any LGBT people, not even members of the lesbian and gay Christian movement. That went down quite badly with the public, because they thought, well, perhaps if he'd met us, we wouldn't have done the protest, which is true. So the upshot was that he did, as a result of that protest, meet with the lesbian and gay Christian movement for the first time. And then some other bishops who claimed they were not aware that he was agitating against gay equality, they spoke out in favour. They made public statements saying that they, as Christian leaders, felt that discrimination was incompatible with the Christian faith, and they believed that LGBT people deserved equal rights. So in that sense, again, there was a positive, or two positive outcomes. I think that's probably been the example of all, pretty much the example of all the different campaigns I've done over the years. The protest, to me, is not the end. It's the catalyst, it's the beginning. So when I ambushed Mike Tyson, when he was world heavyweight champion, outside his gym in Memphis, Tennessee in 2002, the protest was not just about challenging him, it was about trying to persuade him to make a statement in support of LGBT rights. He'd previously been using homophobic slurs and abuse against Lennox Lewis, who was the British challenger for his world heavyweight title. So he'd been making all kinds of slurs that Lennox Lewis was gay and so on. So I went there to challenge him, to put him on the spot. And fortunately, there were TV crews and media there. So as he got out of his SUV, I ran up to him and held up a placard saying, I can't remember what exactly it said, something like, "Tyson, stop your homophobia," and demanded he explain why he was using this homophobic language, that prejudice should have no place in sport. Anyway, he was very shocked and very defensive. He looked almost frightened for a minute. But then when he realized I didn't have a weapon, then I think he went to punch me. And I thought, wow, I don't want to get a punch from Mike Tyson. That'll be the end of me. But then he saw the TV crews and then pulled his fist back. So I said, why are you using this homophobic, abusive language? And he got very, very defensive. And he said things like, well, first of all, he denied it. And then he admitted it. And then he said, well, I didn't really mean it. I was just, that's what we do in boxing, We would try and wind up our opponents. And I said, well, you wouldn't like it if someone used your race to bait you and wind up you. And that would be wrong, If a white, fighter used racism as a ploy against you as a black boxer, you wouldn't like it. And he conceded the point. And so in the end, I said to him, look, if you're not homophobic, and he said, yes, I'm not homophobic. He was so insistent he wasn't homophobic. I said, well, okay, make a statement saying that you support gay rights, and he did. He said he deplored discrimination against gay people. The first boxing figure, or world-class boxing figure to ever do it, as far as I know. And that went all over the place. So another really example of a positive outcome of direct action. The final example I'll give you goes back to the church. The Canterbury Cathedral protest was in 1998. The previous protest was in 1994. Every year, the Church of England holds its synod, which is basically a parliament of the church, comprising of laity and clergy and bishops. So we decided, when I say we, I was part of the LGBT rights group Outrage. We decided that we want to challenge the church over the way in which many of its bishops were gay, secretly, but they were supporting anti-gay laws. they were saying that gay people are not entitled to equal rights. They were signed up to the church's teaching that homosexuality is a terrible sin and that gay people must repent. Yet they were themselves gay. So a clear case of hypocrisy. So we never outed anyone because they were gay and in the closet. It was because they were hypocrites and homophobes. So what we did on the opening day of the General Synod, which is held in Church House near Westminster Abbey in London, we stood there on the steps holding placards with the names of 10 bishops with the words, Bishop Michael Marshall, tell the truth. Bishop Mervyn Stockwood, tell the truth. All these bishops were always preaching that we should tell the truth, yet they weren't telling the truth about their own sexuality. So it was basically, we were holding them to adhere to the standards that they expected of us. It created an absolute furore. I was denounced as, quote, a homosexual terrorist, a gay fascist, public enemy number one, simply because we were calling out these bishops over their two-faced double standards. They were preaching one thing in public and doing something different in private. Now the upshot was, one of those bishops did deny being gay, and he was the one on which we had the most evidence. None of the others did. The church was so embarrassed that this resulted in the first ever dialogue between the Church of England and the LGBT community. So the Archbishop of Canterbury set up a dialogue under the auspices of Bishop Nigel MacCulloch, who was the Bishop of Manchester at the time. He set up a dialogue between the Church of England and the lesbian and gay Christian movement and others. That had never happened before. But even in this period, the Archbishop himself, Archbishop Coe, he wasn't meeting us, but he delegated this other bishop to do so. So that was one positive outcome. The second positive outcome was that some of those bishops eventually became allies and supporters. You know, people say we wrecked their lives. We didn't wreck their lives. You know, they were just deeply embarrassed at being caught out. But in the end, some of them became allies and supporters of the LGBT community. On top of that, in about a month or so afterwards, the House of Bishops was due to meet. Gay issues were not on the agenda, but because of what we did, they became on the agenda and resulted in the bishops issuing what was at the time by far the strongest ever statement against homophobia. A really strong, powerful statement condemning homophobia, discrimination, violence against LGBT people. Now, none of that would have happened if we hadn't called out those bishops. So again, the protest was not an end in itself. It was a catalyst, a mechanism for other subsequent changes. I could go on and on, but I'll just finish about the current campaigns very briefly. As you may know, today in the Supreme Court, there is a case being heard by Charles Keaton and Rebecca Steinfeld. They are a heterosexual male-female couple who want to have a civil partnership. For those who don't know, civil partnerships were first proposed in 2003 and 2004 by the then Labour government as a form of legal recognition for same-sex relationships. This was at a time when myself and other LGBT people were pushing for same-sex marriage, and the government of Tony Blair felt that was a step too far. So they offered civil partnerships as a compromise. They were not the gold standard, they were second best, but at least they did enshrine some legal rights for same-sex couples. The problem was that this new legislation was to apply only to same-sex couples, so that heterosexual couples were forbidden to have a civil partnership. And although we were a gay rights organisation campaigning for LGBT rights, we were furious that the government was proposing a new law that was not equality. It was going to compound the ban on same-sex marriage, which existed at the time, with a ban on opposite-sex civil partnerships. Two wrongs don't make a right. So we called out the government and said, if you're going to have civil partnerships, they have to be open to everyone, gay and straight. The government rejected that, and ever since, myself and others have been campaigning to ensure that heterosexual couples can have the same option as gay couples, the option of a marriage or a civil partnership. Charles and Rebecca began, after all the protests and lobbying failed, Charles and Rebecca began a legal action to overturn the ban on opposite-sex civil partnerships back in 2014. So they went to the High Court, then to the Appeal Court, and now they're at the Supreme Court. The High Court ruled against them, but they were given leave to appeal to the Appeal Court. The Appeal Court ruled against them 2-1, so it wasn't unanimous, but did say this is clearly discrimination, this is clear inequality, it cannot be sustained in the long term. The government must resolve this discrimination. It can't indefinitely postpone it. So even though that was the ruling of the Appeal Court last year, still the law hasn't been changed. Still there's discrimination. So Charles and Rebecca were in the Supreme Court yesterday and today to say, look, the government has had a chance, an opportunity to equalise the law. They've declined to do so, so therefore we want the Supreme Court to rule that this is unjust, unlawful discrimination. Now I would say there's a fairly good chance that the Supreme Court will rule in that way. Baroness Hale, who is the lead judge, has already, in speeches and writings months ago, intimated that she's sympathetic to equal civil partnerships. So if she has influence, and she certainly does, I think we're hopeful of getting a positive result. But it's so shocking to me that this couple have to go to court and have had to spend over £100,000 to get a basic principle of justice, that all of us, whoever we are, we should all be equal before the law. There shouldn't be one law for this community and another for that. Everybody should be equal before the law. So we are very hopeful. The Supreme Court probably won't give a deliberation until, probably the summer at the earliest. They very rarely give immediate decisions. Who knows? They might have heard the case and be so fed up with the government's obstruction and delays, they might give a verdict tomorrow, or this week, but more likely the summer or later in the autumn. So that gives a flavour of some of the campaigns I do, and hopefully now you can ask questions and about those issues or any issues you wish. Thank you.